Steele Venters is out for the year once again, and while it is devastating for the Eastern Washington transfer, the good news is the Zags have the depth to shoulder this loss.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by GameTime. Folks, download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Well, Gonzaga is in the top 7 for a Canadian prospect in the 2025 class. We're going to talk about that. But first, we are talking about the big and incredibly unfortunate news out of Spokane. Steele Venters is done again for the season. We'll talk about what happened, what it means for Steele, his eligibility, his future in Spokane. We'll also talk about what it means for Gonzaga, their ability to withstand the loss of Steele Venters for the upcoming season. All that coming up on today's show. Steele Venters suffered an Achilles injury on his left Achilles. We don't know the full extent of what happened, how it happened, when it happened even, but there was a press release by Gonzaga on Tuesday afternoon indicating that he would miss the upcoming 2024-25 season. This is, of course, coming off of an entirely missed season last year for Steele Venters, who suffered a right ACL injury on his knee. I think there's a distinction there, the right knee for the ACL and the left Achilles. And I think some people will say, okay, well, he got separate injuries, separate legs. That's a good thing. I don't necessarily know that it's a good thing. I wouldn't be good to have suffered the same or a equally devastating injury on the same leg in different spots. But I do think that we can't necessarily assume that they're not related. I'm not a medical professional. Even if I was a medical professional, I have not seen any of the data on what's going on with Steele, so I don't want to project or present anything. I think the idea that these injuries are fully separate is not necessarily true. It's possible there was some overcompensation when going through the recovery process. Seeing back-to-back injuries like this is often were related in some capacity, but either way, it's a tragedy. I mean, it's a complete tragedy for this young man who's always wanted to play at Gonzaga, grew up in Ellensburg, Washington, middle of the state. Gonzaga was the place to be. Lots of central Washington area players who want to come to Gonzaga, who want to play for this program. And Steele was good enough to do so, put in the time and effort at Eastern Washington, comes to Gonzaga, gets injured last year 2 days before the season starts against Yale. November 10th was the first game for Gonzaga last year. November 8th was when we found out that Steele suffered that ACL injury and was going to miss the year. Quote from Mark Few in the press release on Tuesday. He says, quote, "We are heartbroken for Steele. He was working so hard to come back from his knee injury. We will continue to support Steele through his healing process and know that he will come back better and stronger." I really can't state enough how just sad this is for this young man. Again, a player who had the skill set to contribute significantly in this program last year and would have contributed again this year. We'll talk a little bit more about what his role likely would have been this year and who's going to kind of replace those minutes for the Zags. But I want to focus first on the Venters side of things, because again, this is a kid who plays in Ellensburg. He goes to Eastern Washington to start his career. Redshirts his freshman year at Eastern. Plays a small role as a redshirt freshman, then as a sophomore explodes, has a phenomenal season, 16.7 points per game, shot 43.5% from three, which was top 10 in the nation. Comes back to Eastern for his junior year, his redshirt junior year, wins Big Sky Player of the Year, average about 15 points, 3 rebounds per game, a little less effective as a three-point shooter, still 37% on over 6 attempts per game. He was a high-volume, prolific three-point shooter. Again, he was Big Sky Player of the Year in a conference that featured a small forward at Northern Colorado named Dalton Connect. Last year, Dalton Connect transferred to Tennessee, was an All-American, probably would have won Player of the Year in the country had there not been a Zach Edey playing for Purdue Connect goes in the first round of the NBA draft to the Los Angeles Lakers. That guy did not win Big Sky Player of the Year because Steele Venters did. Does that mean Venters would have had a Dalton Connect-like impact for Gonzaga last year? Not necessarily. Different types of players were asked to fill different roles, or were going to be asked to fill different roles. But losing Steele last year was devastating for Gonzaga. The timing was terrible. Getting hurt 2 days before the season was a huge blow to a Gonzaga team last year that did not have enough depth. They didn't have enough depth even if Steele was fully healthy. It wasn't there. But losing Steele really crushed them. Dusty Stromer stepped into a starting role, and he did fine. He did fine with the circumstance that was handed to him. He wasn't expected to fill that role. That was not the expectation for him, for Coach Few, for the players, his teammates, anybody. And about halfway through the season, or a little farther than halfway into the season after the loss to Santa Clara, Mark Few made a switch, brought Ben Gregg into the starting lineup, felt that Ben Gregg and Anton Watson could be could kind of play the 3 and the 4 positions respectively. Watson more playing a 3 kind of defensively, whereas Ben Gregg was playing the 3 a bit more offensively as more of a floor spacer. It allowed Dusty Stromer to come off the bench. We've talked about this many times on this podcast, but the difference that change in the starting lineup made for Gonzaga and unlocked Ben Gregg, unlocked Dusty Stromer, and that combined with some comfortability between Graham Ike and Ryan Nembhard, a step up for Nolan Hickman, various other things that happened, led Gonzaga to a tremendous finish to the season and a 9th straight appearance in the Sweet 16. But Gonzaga really struggled last year, and not having Steele Venters was a big part of it. It limited their depth in the backcourt. It forced Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman to play 40-plus minutes a game at times, or like 38-plus minutes a game. It forced Dusty Stromer into a bigger role, and it limited Gonzaga's ability to space the floor. That is what he was on that roster to do, and he wasn't able to bring that for Gonzaga last year. Before we get into what this means for Gonzaga this upcoming season, one of the other kind of elements of this question is what's next for Steele? It's obviously too early to know. It depends how the recovery goes for this Achilles injury. I suppose it's better to get hurt in August than in November, but this is the kind of injury that's going to last a year plus. Just like last year, I mean, he suffered the ACL injury in November, and he was trending towards being able to come back around the start of the season, although we hadn't heard an update super recently. We'd seen some clips. He was in practices. He was participating. I don't believe that he was at full speed. I don't believe he was in 5-on-5 scrimmages. If I'm remembering correctly, I believe the plan was for him to start being able to do like 5-on-5 work and more game speed stuff in like September, October. I said this on the show a handful of times. I don't believe that Steele was I don't believe the plan was for him to be thrown into a huge role for Gonzaga right away, in part because of the personnel they had on the roster. They didn't need him to, but also because I don't think that they were expecting him to be ready to play 25, 28 minutes a game right away. So now you have a situation where he wasn't quite at 100% before he got hurt. Now he's got another injury to deal with on another part of his body. He's still recovering from the ACL injury, pretty close to done with that, but you still got to finish up your rehab there while now rehabbing a significant injury on the other side of your body. This is a huge, long road to recovery for Steele Venters. It doesn't mean that he can't get there, but frankly, it also doesn't mean that he will. He might not. That is a reality that I think needs to be faced. And again, I will say this again because it is important. I don't want what I'm saying here to be viewed as medical advice or medical analysis of the situation. I don't know. What I do know is players who miss back-to-back entire seasons with separate injuries are probably not going to return at full strength at a super high rate. Some do, most don't. Does Venters? I don't know. We saw a player medically retire from Gonzaga last year in Caden Perry. It is possible that is the route that eventually happens with Steele Venters. He's not going to make that decision right now, I don't think. It sounds like the plan is for him to rehab and come back again. But again, this next year will be his 7th year in college. He'll have 2 years of eligibility. He could play next year and the year after that if he wanted to. I'd be very surprised if he did that. I think he could come back next year. That's a conversation we'll have many more times as we get more updates on his recovery and the situation as it unfolds for him right now. But the main focus right now, we'll figure out what's going on with Steele, whether he's back next year, whether he ever plays in a Gonzaga uniform. I sure hope he gets the chance to, as somebody who's wanted to do that his whole life. But right now, I want to focus on what this means for Gonzaga for the upcoming 2024-25 season, because the Zags had to scramble last year in a major way without Steele Venters. But this year, they're a lot more equipped. for him not being in the picture? We're going to talk about that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, I want to talk about today's sponsored GameTime. Going to live events is the absolute best, whether it's sports, whether it's music, theater, comedy, and more. We're finally getting college sports back. Football is back. Basketball is 10 weeks away. I'm looking forward to making new memories this college sports season. And the great news is when you're getting tickets for this year, GameTime has a new feature, which is called GameTime Picks, that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. GameTime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And right now, folks, Battle in Seattle tickets are available. Gonzaga, Kentucky, December 7th at Climate Pledge Arena. You can get tickets for $58 on GameTime right now. Their super deal is $140 tickets, just a few rows up on the baseline. Phenomenal views for $140. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets by using GameTime. Download the GameTime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. $58 tickets, you can get them for $38 to go see Gonzaga versus Kentucky if you use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. So folks, download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is also brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, folks, America's #1 sportsbook. Usually we're filling you in on a boost or a bonus offer from FanDuel. Well, we have something a little bit different for you today. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And folks, we're talking Steele Venters, what that injury does for the Zags. It hasn't changed their national championship odds at this point. FanDuel still has the Zags at plus 2,000 to win it all. If you're still a believer, drop $5 on that, and you can get some really cool opportunities to watch NFL Sunday Ticket. Folks, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook today. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking the Steele Venters injury, folks. And if you want to hear a different perspective on the Steele Venters injury, my good friend Isaac Shade, co-host with myself on the Locked On College Basketball podcast. I know many of you listen to the show. Thursday's episode, Locked On College Basketball, Isaac covers the Steele Venters injury from an outsider perspective. Definitely worth checking out. It's got some fantastic insight in that conversation. If you haven't checked out Locked On College Basketball, you can find it wherever you find Locked On Zags. All right. So we talked Steele Venters. We talked what this injury means for him, the devastation that you must feel getting so close to playing for this team, spending a whole year recovering from a knee injury only to suffer a different injury on a different side of your body in the Achilles. Really, really heartbreaking stuff for a young man who deserves much better than this. But let's talk about what this means for Gonzaga. Those of you who are eagle-eyed listeners, eagle-ear listeners, I guess is the better way to put it, who have listened to the show throughout the offseason, you everydayers, I appreciate all of you. You may already know that I didn't project Steele to be as big of a piece of the rotation as I think many others did. And we'll never know whether I was going to be right about that or not. I'm not trying to take a victory lap now, certainly. But what I mean by that is the Zags have 8 rotation pieces already. I think Steele Venters was going to be 9th. And for those of you who have followed this team for a long time, the 9th guy in the rotation doesn't usually play all that much. I think Gonzaga was going to be in an interesting spot heading into this year where I don't think they would have had the ability to play fewer than 9 guys. Like if they played 8 consistently, that 9th person would have either been Venters, where a fully healthy Steele Venters just playing 5 or 6 minutes per game just didn't feel realistic. There's no way they were going to ratchet Dusty Stromer's playing time down all the way to 6-7 minutes a game. So I don't know how they were going to handle a full 9-man rotation. But take a look at it right now. You got 4 starters returning in Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman, Ben Gregg, and Graham Ike. You got Michael Ajayi expected to step into that starting role, replacing Anton Watson. Whether it's him or not, if it's not him, it's probably Caliph Battle. So either way, those are 6 guys right there who are very clearly part of Gonzaga's rotation next year. You also have Braden Huff, who no doubt unquestionably deserves a major spot as the backup 5 in Gonzaga's rotation next year. That's 7 guys right there, and then Dusty Stromer's 8. Maybe Steele Venters would have been 8 and Dusty would have been 9, but either way, the playing time would have been a challenge based on what we know about Mark Few the likelihood of both Venters and Stromers playing a big role for the Zags this upcoming season was pretty limited. Now, obviously, we know a solution to that. I shouldn't say solution. We know now that there is that issue is not going to be there. Dusty Stromer will be the 8th man, most likely. Caleb Battle, Braden Huff, Dusty Stromer coming off the bench. That's my expectation. And I think that the main beneficiary of Steele not being able to play this upcoming season is going to be Dusty Stromer. That's not a revolutionary take. It is not a hot take. It is what happened last year and kind of what is expected to happen this year. But last year, when Steele Venters goes down with an injury, Stromer steps all the way into a starting role and plays 30-plus minutes a night early in the season before he switched roles with Ben Gregg. This year, Stromer absorbs what I think was a not nearly as big role for Steele Venters. My projection early in the offseason had Stromer playing less minutes than he played last year. That didn't feel right. A freshman who very clearly improved throughout the season, having his minutes decreased as a sophomore is not typical, is not usual, is not what you see from a program that prides itself on player development. Now, that's probably not going to be the case. Stromer will probably play a similar role to what he played last year in terms of minutes per game. I still expect him to come off the bench. I don't see him starting over Ajayi or Battle. But I do think that his playing time is now going to be more in line with what it was last year. And the majority of the minutes that would have gone to Steele are now going to go to Dusty. The other options for increased playing time for Gonzaga. The number one additional option outside of Dusty Stromer in my mind is Tarleton State transfer wing Emmanuel Innocenti. Innocenti is a freshman last year at Tarleton State in the WAC. He's from Italy. They just did a nice video about him on the Gonzaga website. If you've been following them on social media or on Instagram, they've been kind of doing Meet the New Zags, a series. They just did one with Emmanuel recently. We got to hear from him, his kind of background, and it was a really nice, fun video for all of these guys. But for Innocenti in particular, the timing was good because now a lot of people are wondering about him. What does that look like for him? Does he step into a bigger role? And to be clear, I think Innocenti goes to 9th in the rotation. 9th in the rotation is, and I've used this example before because I think it's a perfect encapsulation of what this role typically looks like. It's the freshman year Dominic Harris minutes or freshman year Julian Strother. Both those guys played pretty similar roles. It's about 6 or 7 minutes per game is your average, but that's because you only play 24, 26 games in the season. You don't play in the big games. Mark Few ratchets down to 8, sometimes 7 in games against the same areas of the world in conference play. And in non-conference, the UConns, the Kentuckys, the battle for Atlantis, those kinds of games, you probably won't see the 9th person in the rotation. Again, when Steele was healthy, maybe you would have. But now I don't think Emmanuel Innocenti plays in those games. But I do think his playing time takes a slight bump without Steele Venters in the mix. I would still project it to be something like he finishes the season averaging 7 minutes per game in about 25 games. That would be my projection for Emmanuel Innocenti at this point. Probably not a huge bump from where he would have been, but you maybe bring him in a little bit earlier in a blowout game. Maybe he comes in at the under 8 instead of the under 4. Subtle differences. Gets him more experience, gets him more exposure to Gonzaga's system, to their offense, to the WCC. Gets him more ready to take on a bigger role in the future for the Zags. Perhaps there's a bump for Junsuk Yo, who's kind of a 3-4 hybrid, didn't play much last year, saw his playing time decrease as the season went on, struggled to kind of acclimate to the system the way that a lot of folks thought that he would. I still expect Yo now moves from 11th to 10th in the rotation. We talk about how the 9th guy doesn't play much in Gonzaga's system. 10th guy plays even less. So I wouldn't expect a big bump for Yo. The other guys in the rotation are outside the rotation, Ismaila Diane, who this doesn't really impact his playing time, and then Braden Smith, who's the 12th or 13th scholarship spot for Gonzaga. He's not expected to play next year because he's planning to redshirt. If anybody is curious if the Steele Venters injury is likely to alter the plans with Braden Smith, I'm here to tell you I think that is extremely unlikely. Braden Smith is a point guard. He is a Ryan Nembhard replacement. The only way I see Braden Smith's redshirt getting disrupted is if there is a serious injury to either Ryan Nembhard or Nolan Hickman. That is the only way. Caleb Battle, maybe. Before I would have told you no, but if they lose Battle and Venters, maybe they make a change and they bring Braden Smith off of his red shirt and start playing him right away. But I don't think that just losing Steele for the season is going to change their plan with regards to Braden Smith, especially because they have Emmanuel Innocenti in the mix to fill a spot there. The big impact for Gonzaga is the loss of three-point shooting. It was the big impact for Gonzaga last year. This year, same. Bench three-point scoring was an issue for Gonzaga and remains an issue at this point. Dusty Stromer needs to step up as a three-point shooter. Fortunately, he proved that he can. Last year, in the first 16 games of the season, which is when he started 15 out of those 16 games, Dusty Stromer took 3.5 three-point attempts per game. He shot 32%. In the final 19 games of the season, when Stromer was coming off the bench, he took 2.1 three-point attempts per game, shot 41%. Massive difference. Massive difference. Stromer's going to be in a similar role coming off the bench. If he can be a 40+% three-point shooter, even if it's on a relatively low volume, his ability to space the floor to command attention from opposing defenses because they know he can knock down those open shots. That is a big win for Gonzaga. Because Caleb Battle, great player, not a spot-up three-point shooter, not a swing the ball around, get him a look from three, knock it down. He can. I'm not saying he's a bad three-point shooter. That's not his game. His game, he's a bulldozer. His game is driving to the rim, putting pressure on the rim, getting to the free throw line. That is his game. Gonzaga's not going to ask him to do more than that. That's what they want him to do. That's what he's here to do. So that's going to remain his role. If that's his role, and Steele Venters isn't in the mix, you don't have a lot of shooting coming off the bench. Braden Huff can space the floor a little bit, but a stretch five is different than getting some outside shooting from your guards and wings. Michael Ajayi shot over 40% last year on a very small volume. We know Ryan Nembhard struggled significantly the first half of the year. This team's three-point shooting is a potential hurdle for them to overcome if they want to win a national championship. Steele Venters helped check that box. Looking at the things Gonzaga needed to do to be a championship caliber team, three-point shooting, floor spacing was one of the things. Venters was a reason we felt good about that. Now, that's a bit more of a question mark. And I think of all the things that are the biggest impact for Gonzaga, they have the depth, they have the players who can fill the playing time gap in a way that they didn't last year. But there's questions about whether they have the personnel to fill the three-point shooting gap left by the absence of Steele Venters. It's going to come down to Dusty Stromer. Emmanuel Innocenti shot less than 31% last year from three. The odds of him improving dramatically as a three-point shooter to the point where he gets a rotation spot based on his outside shooting, extremely slim. Caleb Battle improving as a three-point shooter, very possible. I don't want to rule that out as an option. But again, I think a lot of the pressure to provide what Steele was going to provide to this team is going to fall on Dusty Stromer. And if he's ready for it, Gonzaga's going to be in just fine. But if he's not, they're going to have to scramble to figure out how exactly to replicate that specific area of need on this roster. Well, we're going to transition away from our conversation about Steele Venters. The Zags were once again listed in a recruits final list. Could another Canadian be coming to Spokane? We got more coming up on that in just a second. Right after I tell you all about today's sponsor, 5 Hour Energy. Just about every day after lunch, I feel tired. It's that little afternoon lull that we all feel. And if you're like me, good news, you're far from alone. In fact, research shows that more than 70% of us hit that wall after lunch. Let a 5 Hour Energy shot help you leap over that wall instead of crashing into it. I've been working on cutting sugar out as I get a little older, so I love that the 5 Hour Energy has zero sugar, plus it's got a convenient, portable size, and is the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5 Hour Energy website has flavors galore: watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more, and you can try them all. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12 or 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it is delivered right to your door. So just go to 5hourenergy.com and get some 5 Hour Energy product today. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. Offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. So go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, folks, closing out the show today, moving away from the conversation about the tragic injury to Steele Venters, missing a second straight season after transferring to Gonzaga from Eastern Washington last offseason. Talking about a few other topics here, some recruiting news here. Efiosa Oliogu named Gonzaga in his top 7. This list came out actually, I think, over the weekend, or maybe it was on Monday. I'd missed it when it first came out. Wanted to talk about it here. Oliogu was a target for Gonzaga a while ago. We talked about him, I think, earlier this offseason, maybe even during the season. His name had kind of cropped up as a player the Zags had been pursuing, had made an offer to. 2025 prospect, 6'6" wing. Here's the deal. Oliogu named his top 7 a couple days ago. Gonzaga's on the list alongside Alabama, Arizona State, Maryland, Memphis, Oklahoma State, and TCU. That is your top 7 right there for Oliogu. He's only taken one visit. Now it's to Maryland. He also does not have any visits scheduled, and as far as I could tell, has not indicated to 247 Sports or On3 or Tobias Bass or anybody else who gets recruiting information or intel. Oliogu has not indicated an intention to visit any other school. Visited Maryland, presumably liked it at Maryland, listed Maryland in his top 7, listed 6 other schools in his top 7, and that's kind of where we're at. This feels to me like a situation of, here are 6 other schools that pursued me, and also Maryland. Recruits do this. I don't blame recruits for doing this. There's a lot of intentionality behind it, whether it's to try to boost an offer from Maryland for a little bit more NIL money, whether it is to see if putting Gonzaga or Alabama or somebody like that on the list could generate more interest from them. Again, I don't know. Maybe Gonzaga has made a strong late push for Oliogu, and that is why he's listing them in his top 7. I'm not saying that's not a possibility, but I'm also saying it's possible that Gonzaga pursued him for a while, extended an offer, haven't pursued him a lot lately. He's leaning out Maryland, and yet when he's releasing his top list, he wants to include those other schools who've made him an offer. Nothing wrong with doing that. Just doesn't necessarily mean that there's a ton of interest on the Gonzaga side. Again, could go either way. But since we haven't heard Oliogu's name in a while, I'm starting to lean that he's more likely that he is interested in coming to Gonzaga, or at least using Gonzaga to maybe leverage some more NIL cash from the Terrapins, whereas Gonzaga may not be as invested in bringing him to Spokane. But who knows? If they were to bring him in, there's a lot of appeal of Oliogu, not just the Canadian connection, although that's a big part of it. Oliogu currently plays at Overtime Elite in Atlanta, so he's not currently playing high school basketball in Canada. 6'6" wing he's originally from Ontario, like I said, playing in Atlanta right now. 65th ranked prospect in the 2025 class, according to On3's industry rankings. The site that's really propping up his ranking is Rivals. Rivals has him 43rd in the class. Next highest is On3, who have him 68th. 247 Sports has him down at 87. And ESPN, which only ranks the top 100 prospects, does not have him ranked. So ESPN has him outside the top 100. 247 has him outside the top 85. On 368, Rivals, the only place that has him as a top 50 prospect. Recruiting stuff on him, Jamie Shaw at On3 wrote a nice scouting report on him. Effectively, he is a very physically developed player. He's very strong. He's got a lot of bursts and athleticism. He attacks the rim extremely well in the half court and in transition. He's got good off-ball instincts, but he needs to work on the jump shot consistency. The jump shot is there, but it needs work. He's a straight line driver who attacks the basket. He's a hellraiser in transition, but the half court offense is questionable. The defense is still questionable. That's not uncommon with prospects, with 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds. This is not like a concerning scouting report. You can see the appeal for Gonzaga. They love guys who get out in transition, who attack the rim relentlessly. They love big-bodied 6'6". I mean, he sounds a lot like Caleb Battle, frankly. Big-bodied 6'6", attacks the rim with reckless abandon, gets out in transition. Like, that's a lot of what we're expecting Caleb Battle to bring to Gonzaga this year. Oliogu is kind of in that ilk of that mix. But again, there's a lot of the tea leaves right now pointing to him eventually being in the Big Ten with Maryland. Maybe Gonzaga stays in the mix here. Maybe they make a late push for him because they know he's at least somewhat interested in the program. But I wouldn't expect to see Oliogu in a Gonzaga uniform, but he's a name certainly to keep an eye on. As well as a couple other names that I want to talk about here very briefly before we close out the show. Kingston Flemings and Nick Kamenia. You've heard those names a bunch of times if you are regular listeners to the Locked On Zags podcast. Kamenia has been a target for Gonzaga since 2022. Fleming's a much more recent target, but we've talked about him quite a bit lately. Those two guys are both on Team USA's U18 3-on-3 squad. They're participating in a FIBA tournament right now as teammates together. They both scored 6 or more points against Spain. This is a group that looks really good playing together. Kamenia is that stretch 4, 6'8", kind of two-way wing type prospect. Kingston Flemings is a phenomenal point guard. They're playing 3-on-3 together. Tobias Bass talked about it on a recent tweet that he posted, kind of saying he thinks more high school prospects should play 3-on-3 ball. It shows more of your one-on-one skills defensively and offensively. You're going to get exposed if you struggle on one end of the floor or the other. And these two guys playing together, I mean, it can't be a bad thing, right? It can't be a bad thing. They are both being pursued by a few similar schools, but Gonzaga is one of the main through lines for both these guys. If Kingston Flemings and Nick Comenia really like playing together, like they really enjoy it, and they think, man, we could do some real damage at the college level together next year. Guess where they could go? They could end up in Spokane. We could have a class with Nick Comenia, Kingston Flemings, Davis Fogel. Again, probably less likely on Efiosa Oliogu, but we know Fogel's coming. If Flemings, Fogel, Comenia is your 2025 recruiting class, plus you got an up-and-comer in Ismaila Diane. You have Braden Smith's going to be able to be there for that season. You, of course, got Dusty Stromer still going to be in the mix. Braden Huff's still going to be in the mix, most likely. This could be a really fun team. Both Comenia and Flemings are not certainly nowhere close to locks for Gonzaga, but they're both still firmly in the mix. And them playing together, in my mind, cannot hurt for Gonzaga. It cannot hurt their odds of landing both these guys together. Last thing I want to mention here, a pair of former Zags, Rem Bakamis and Ken Nakagawa, both on Arizona's staff, have both been promoted to assistant coaches. Officially, Rem has been with Arizona for a very long time. He followed Tommy Lloyd over there from Gonzaga, been the director of player development at Arizona for the last couple of years. Of course, a former walk-on at Gonzaga who was pursued to be a walk-on for the team by Tommy Lloyd when he was at Gonzaga, called up Rem and his father, Bill Bakamis, who's a longtime high school basketball coach in Longview, and said, hey, we'd love to have you on the team, and basically have been kind of prepping him to become a coach. And now he officially is. He officially has the title of assistant coach. Nakagawa was doing video scouting for Arizona. He was doing that at Gonzaga previously as well. So nice to see a pair of former Zags getting a boost, getting a promotion. Rem has always had future coach written all over him. So to see him finally get that title at Arizona is great for him. Worth pointing out, Shemek Karnowski is still at Arizona as a graduate assistant. I'm curious if he will get bumped into a staff coaching role in the future as well. That's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. I'll be back on Thursday with a fun guest talking about Gonzaga's non-conference schedule, talking about the rest of the WCC schedules as well. So look out for that in your feeds coming up very soon. Thanks again, folks, for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.